So let's start creating a directory for the project, cd into it, and let's init an npm project. Now let's install the Next and React dependencies. After that we need to install TypeScript and the required type definitions. We are not gonna need to configure a Tsconfig file manually, but we need to create an empty file, so let's create it. Let's open up VS Code now. And let's configure the npm scripts. Dev to run the dev server. Build to create the production files. And start to serve the production files. Let's now create a main page. For this component, I'm gonna add a simple welcome message. And export it as default. Keep in mind that the error that appears is gonna be fixed once we start the next server, because the tsconfig file is gonna be populated automatically. Once the compilation is complete, let's navigate to the test server. Let's add a style sheet. We are gonna use CSS modules, so I'm gonna create a homepage class. To recognize the changes more easily, I'm gonna center the text and set the color to red. Let's now import the classes. Once imported, we assign the class name. And we save the changes. As we can see in the terminal, we are getting an error, because the CSS modules are not configured yet. So let's install the required packages. After installation is complete, let's create a Next.config file. This file is gonna be picked automatically, so there is no need to set it up in another place. We are gonna import with.sas, which is a wrapper for the webpack config, and we are gonna export as default with.sas and enable the CSS modules. We run the dev server again, and it should be working fine. Since we restarted the server, we need to reload the page, and CSS changes are being applied correctly. Now let's create a reusable component. It's gonna be named header. This is gonna be a really simple component that is gonna print whatever we pass to it. So we create an h1 to make it larger. We get children from the props, and we print it. After that, we export the component as default. We go back to the main page and import the newly created component. Import header from, let's go one level up, component header. We're gonna add it on top of the welcome message. Now let's wait until compilation finishes and changes are being applied correctly. Let's go back to the components directory and create an style sheet. The class name can be anything. It'll be named header for this case. I'm gonna set a different color to make it more clear. And now I'm gonna go back to the header component and import the classes. Import classes from style.module.scss. After that we apply the class name, save the file, and verify the changes. Good. Now let's go back to the main page and replace a couple of dots with a more readable sign. In this case I'm gonna use a tilde, although it can be any other sign. As we can see in the terminal, the module is not found, since we did not configure the Tsconfig paths correctly. So let's go back to the Tsconfig file and let's set a base path. In this case it's gonna be the same as the Tsconfig file. So let's set a base URL. Dot. After that we set the custom paths. For this case I'm gonna use the tilde sign and everything else inside of it. And as a target is gonna be the files in the same directory and everything else inside of it. Let's go back to the terminal and restart the dev server. As we can see in the main page, now there is no error. However, the dev server is still failing to recognize the Tsconfig paths. That's because we need to update the Webpack configuration. So let's stop the server and let's install an additional package. This is gonna be installed as a dev dependency, so npm i-t tsconfig paths webpack plugin. After that we go back to the Next.config file and we are gonna create a custom plugin. To do that we import the recently installed package tsconfig paths plugin equals require tsconfig paths webpack plugin const with tsconfig paths. We're gonna pass the previous Next configuration, we're gonna fall back to an empty object, and we're gonna return an object. We're gonna spread the previous config, if any, and we're gonna create a custom object with a webpack field. This is gonna be a function that is gonna process our config. So basically this function is gonna update the previous webpack config. Let's create a new configuration object. For this we're gonna spread the previous config, and we're gonna patch the resolved plugins. These are not the same as the normal plugins. The resolved plugins only affect the way Webpack resolves paths. We need to make sure that previously there is plugins in use, otherwise we are gonna get an error. To do that we validate if config resolve exists, otherwise the spread operator will not do anything. Now we're gonna check if the previous config has a webpack function. If it has it, we're gonna call that function. Make sure not to confuse Next.config with new.config. You can also use whatever name you want for new.config if you prefer. So we call the webpack function, we pass the new configuration and the same options from the parameter. If the function is not defined, we are gonna just return the new config. After that we need to call the custom plugin. So we're gonna cut for a second with sass. And we're gonna call with tsconfig paths and we paste inside with sass. Now let's go back to the terminal and let's run the dev server. Let's refresh the page, and the app is working normally. That's it.